The Dynasty Destroyer, Wayne Gretzky to the Kings. On August 9, 1988, hockey changed forever. The Edmonton Oilers, fresh off their fourth Stanley Cup in 5 years, did the unthinkable. They traded Wayne Gretzky, the greatest player in hockey history, to the Los Angeles Kings. This wasn't just a hockey trade. It was a national crisis in Canada. The Canadian Parliament actually considered buying Gretzky's contract to keep him in the country. That's how significant this was. Gretzky was only 27 years old and in the absolute prime of his career. He had just won his 8th straight Hart Trophy as league MVP. The deal sent Gretzky, Marty McSorley, and Mike Krushelnyski to Los Angeles for Jimmy Carson, Martin Gelinas, 3 first-round draft picks, and $15 million in cash. That cash component is why many consider this a sale rather than a true hockey trade. Oilers owner Peter Pocklington needed money, and Kings owner Bruce McNall was willing to pay. The aftermath was devastating for Edmonton. Though they managed to win one more cup in 1990, the dynasty effectively ended. Meanwhile, Gretzky transformed hockey in Southern California, leading the Kings to the 1993 Stanley Cup Final and helping to spark NHL expansion throughout the American Sunbelt. When Gretzky cried at the press conference announcing the trade, all of Canada cried with him. It remains the most shocking trade in sports history, not just hockey. The captain's departure, Mark Messier to the Rangers. After the Gretzky trade, Mark Messier became the heart and soul of the Oilers, leading them to another Stanley Cup in 1990. But by 1991, the Oilers' financial troubles continued, and they made another franchise-altering move by trading Messier to the New York Rangers. The Oilers received Bernie Nichols, Louis DeBrusque, and Stephen Rice in return. None of these players came close to replacing Messier's leadership or production. Meanwhile, Messier went on to become a legend in New York, famously guaranteeing a victory in Game 6 of the 1994 Eastern Conference Finals against New Jersey, then scoring a hat trick to deliver on that promise. He then led the Rangers to their first Stanley Cup in 54 years, ending the longest championship drought in the NHL at that time. The image of Messier hoisting the cup at Madison Square Garden is one of hockey's most iconic moments, a moment that should have belonged to Edmonton. For the Oilers, this trade, coming just 3 years after the Gretzky deal, completed the dismantling of a dynasty. They wouldn't return to the Stanley Cup Final for 16 years. The MVP giveaway, Joe Thornton to the Sharks. On November 30, 2005, the Boston Bruins made one of the most puzzling trades in NHL history. They sent their captain, Joe Thornton, to the San Jose Sharks for Marco Sturm, Wayne Primo, and Brad Stewart. What makes this trade particularly baffling is that Thornton was just 26 years old and one of the premier centers in the NHL. Even more incredibly, he went on to win the Hart Trophy as league MVP that same season, becoming the only player in NHL history to be traded during an MVP season. While Sturm, Primo, and Stewart were solid NHL players, none of them had Thornton's elite playmaking ability or leadership qualities. Thornton immediately transformed the Sharks into a Western Conference powerhouse, recording 92 points in 58 games after the trade. Over his 15 seasons in San Jose, Thornton became the face of the franchise, recording over 1,000 points and leading the team to their first Stanley Cup Final in 2016. Meanwhile, the Bruins struggled to replace his production down the middle until they drafted Patrice Bergeron and developed him into a star. The Thornton trade remains a cautionary tale about trading a superstar in his prime, especially when personality conflicts rather than hockey reasons drive the decision. The sniper swap, Brett Hull to the Blues. Sometimes a trade looks reasonable at the time, but becomes disastrous in hindsight. That's exactly what happened when the Calgary Flames traded Brett Hull and Steve Bozek to the St. Louis Blues for Rob Ramage and Rick Wamsley in 1988. Hull was a young, unproven scorer who had shown flashes of brilliance, but hadn't yet established himself as a star. Ramage was a solid veteran defenseman, and Wamsley was a capable goaltender. On paper, it seemed like a fair hockey trade. What happened next is the stuff of nightmares for Flames fans. Hull exploded in St. Louis, scoring 72, 86, and 70 goals in consecutive seasons. He became one of the most lethal goal scorers in NHL history, finishing his career with 741 goals, the 4th highest total ever. Ramage and Wamsley helped Calgary win the Stanley Cup in 1989, which provides some consolation. But trading away a player who would score over 700 NHL goals for 2 solid veterans is the definition of a lopsided deal. Hull's iconic number 16 hangs in the rafters in St. Louis, a constant reminder of one of the worst trades in Flames history. The Finnish Flash fiasco, Teemu Selanne to the Ducks. In February 1996, the Winnipeg Jets made a trade that still haunts the franchise, now the Arizona Coyotes. They sent Teemu Selanne, Mark Chouinard, and a fourth-round pick to the Anaheim Mighty Ducks for Chad Kilger, Oleg Tverdovsky, and a third-round pick. Selanne had burst onto the NHL scene with the Jets, setting a rookie record with 76 goals that still stands today. Though his production had dipped slightly in subsequent seasons, he was still a dynamic offensive force and fan favorite in Winnipeg. After the trade, Selanne regained his scoring touch in Anaheim, particularly when paired with Paul Kariya to form one of the most exciting duos in hockey. He would go on to score over 600 NHL goals, win a Stanley Cup with the Ducks in 2007, and earn induction into the Hockey Hall of Fame. The players the Jets received never came close to matching Selanne's impact. Kilger bounced around the league as a journeyman, while Tverdovsky had a decent but unspectacular career. To make matters worse, the Jets relocated to Phoenix just months after the trade, meaning Arizona fans never got to see the Finnish Flash in his prime. This trade exemplifies the danger of giving up on a superstar too soon, especially one with Selanne's rare goal-scoring ability. The goalie grudge, Patrick Waugh to the Avalanche. Some trades are driven by talent evaluation, others are forced by circumstances. The Patrick Waugh trade falls firmly in the latter category. On December 6, 1995, the Montreal Canadiens traded Waugh and captain Mike Keane to the Colorado Avalanche for Jocelyn Thibault, Martin Ruchinski, and Andrei Kovalenko. The trade came days after Waugh had a very public meltdown during a game against the Detroit Red Wings. After allowing 9 goals on 26 shots, Waugh was finally pulled by coach Mario Tremblay. As he skated to the bench, Waugh walked past Tremblay and told team president Ronald Corey, who was sitting behind the bench, that he had played his last game for Montreal. The Canadiens, faced with an ultimatum from their star goaltender, rushed into a trade that would haunt them for decades. Waugh immediately made the Avalanche a Stanley Cup contender, leading them to championships in 1996 and 2001. He continued his Hall of Fame career in Colorado, winning a Conn Smythe Trophy as playoff MVP and cementing his legacy as one of the greatest goaltenders ever. Meanwhile, the Canadiens entered a dark period. Thibault was a serviceable goalie, but nowhere near Waugh's caliber. The proud franchise that had won 24 Stanley Cups would not win another one after trading Waugh. They cycled through dozens of goaltenders trying to find their next star, while watching Waugh win championships and set records in Colorado. This trade shows how personal conflicts can lead to disastrous hockey decisions, and how one moment of anger can change the trajectory of two franchises. The Toronto Triumph, Doug Gilmour to the Maple Leafs. In January 1992, the Calgary Flames and Toronto Maple Leafs completed a massive 10-player trade centered around Doug Gilmour. The Flames sent Gilmour, Jamie McCoon, Rick Nattrass, Kent Manderville, and Rick Wamsley to Toronto for Gary Leeman, Alexander Godinuk, Jeff Reese, Michel Petit, and Craig Berube. Gilmour had been a key part of Calgary's 1989 Stanley Cup championship team, but a contract dispute soured his relationship with management. What happened after the trade made it one of the most lopsided deals in NHL history. Gilmour became an instant legend in Toronto, setting a franchise record with 127 points in 1992-93 and leading the Maple Leafs to back-to-back conference finals appearances. His tenacious two-way play and clutch performances made him a beloved figure in Toronto hockey history. Meanwhile, none of the players Calgary received made a significant impact. Leeman, who had once scored 51 goals for Toronto, managed just 11 goals in 59 games for the Flames before being traded again. This trade transformed the Maple Leafs from a struggling franchise into a contender overnight, while the Flames got virtually nothing in return for a future Hall of Famer in his prime. It's remembered as one of the worst trades in Flames history, and one of the best in Leafs history. The Red Wings regret Marcel Dionne to the Kings. In 1975, the Detroit Red Wings traded 24-year-old Marcel Dionne to the Los Angeles Kings for Dan Maloney, Terry Harper, and a second-round draft pick. Dionne had already established himself as a star in Detroit, scoring 121 points in his final season with the Red Wings. But contract disputes led to the trade, and Dionne went on to have a Hall of Fame career in Los Angeles. He formed the famous Triple Crown line with Dave Taylor and Charlie Simmer, and became one of the most prolific scorers in NHL history, finishing with 1,771 points. Maloney and Harper were solid veterans who helped the Red Wings, but neither came close to replacing Dionne's offensive production. This trade represents a classic case of a team giving up on a young superstar due to financial concerns, only to watch him flourish elsewhere. Dionne never won a Stanley Cup, but he established himself as one of the greatest players never to win one. The Red Wings, meanwhile, would have to wait until the arrival of Steve Yzerman to find another franchise center of Dion's caliber. The Islanders' nightmare, the Alexei Yashin trade. On June 23, 2001, the New York Islanders made a trade that would haunt them for years. They acquired Alexei Yashin from the Ottawa Senators for Zdeno Chara, Bill Muckelt, and the second overall pick in the 2001 draft, which became Jason Spezza. Yashin was a talented center who had scored at nearly a point-per-game pace with Ottawa. The Islanders immediately signed him to a 10-year, $87.5 million contract, one of the largest in NHL history at that time. What followed was a disaster on multiple fronts. Yashin's production declined steadily on Long Island, and he never lived up to his massive contract. The Islanders eventually bought him out in 2007, meaning they continued paying him until 2015, 8 years after he last played for them. Meanwhile, Chara developed into one of the most dominant defensemen in NHL history with the Senators and later the Boston Bruins, winning a Norris Trophy and a Stanley Cup. Spezza became a star center for Ottawa, recording over 900 points in his NHL career. This trade exemplifies the danger of giving up young assets for an established star, especially when that star receives a contract that hampers the team's financial flexibility for years. The Islanders essentially traded away 2 franchise cornerstones for a player who became an albatross. The Rangers' blunder, Rick Middleton to the Bruins. Sometimes the worst trades are the ones that look minor at the time but become increasingly painful as years pass. That's exactly what happened when the New York Rangers traded Rick Middleton to the Boston Bruins for Ken Hodge in 1976. Middleton was a young forward who had shown promise, but hadn't yet established himself as a star. Hodge was a veteran who had success playing alongside Phil Esposito in Boston. The Rangers, hoping to reunite Hodge with Esposito, whom they had acquired earlier, made the deal. The results were disastrous for New York. Hodge played just 1 full season with the Rangers before his career fizzled out. Middleton, meanwhile, blossomed into a star in Boston, playing 12 seasons with the Bruins and scoring 402 goals. He had 5 40-goal seasons and became known as one of the most skilled one-on-one players in the league. This trade serves as a reminder that giving up on young talent too soon can come back to haunt a franchise. The Rangers essentially traded away a player who would score 400-plus NHL goals for 1 season of a declining veteran. The Rangers' double mistake, the Phil Esposito trade. Speaking of the Rangers and Phil Esposito, the trade that brought Esposito to New York in the first place was another major blunder. In 1975, the Rangers acquired Esposito and Carol Vadnais from the Boston Bruins for John Rattel, Brad Park, and Joe Zanussi. While Esposito was a superstar, he was 33 years old and past his prime. Rattel and Park were both in their prime and cornerstone players for the Rangers. Park was one of the best defensemen in the NHL, second only to Bobby Orr, while Rattel was a skilled two-way center. Both Rattel and Park continued their excellent play in Boston, with Park finishing as runner-up for the Norris Trophy 6 times with the Bruins. Esposito had some productive seasons in New York, but never reached the heights he had in Boston, and the Rangers didn't win a Stanley Cup during his tenure. This trade shows the danger of chasing a big name at the expense of team chemistry and long-term planning. The Rangers gave up 2 franchise players for an aging star, disrupting their team identity in the process.